Hey, fifth graders, welcome back to another day of social studies. We'll be learning about something called the Treaty of Paris today and how that finally ended all of the fighting in America between Great Britain and America. So we did learn about how Yorktown was the last major battle, and then we also talked a little bit about how there were small little battles fighting here and there. Some people wouldn't even consider them battles. They would just say skirmishes between like Minutemen and militia because the British didn't necessarily leave America. However, their main troops had been captured. And so that was considered, Yorktown was considered the last major battle, and most people considered the war to be over. However, there were still groups of people that continued to fight when they saw British soldiers. So what we're going to talk about now is something called the Treaty of Paris, and this was extremely important. It happened 2 years later after the Battle of Yorktown, but basically America had, or the Congress had a very hard time convincing the king and parliament to basically give up. I mean, the king knew and parliament knew like they couldn't really win a battle, but they still weren't willing to give America what it wanted, which was its freedom. And so neither side wanted to continue fighting. So the Americans sent some delegates to Paris, and the British sent some there as well. And they talked for many years, trying to figure out, trying to. The Americans wanted to basically have the British declare them as a new country and that they didn't have to have any allegiance to the king or to the crown or anything like that. So the three representatives or delegates that were sent were John Adams, John Jay, and Benjamin Franklin, and they were sent to work out a peace treaty, and it took them a very long time. A peace treaty, or something called a treaty, is a formal agreement between two or more nations. So even now, our country makes treaties with other countries, agreements saying, hey, we'll pay this money if you pay that money, or hey, we'll trade with this if you trade with that, sort of a thing. And so treaties are happening all the time, but this was an important peace treaty that finally declared like fighting is over, we are at peace, we're not going to be enemy nations anymore, and that the Americans won and they deserve what they win. So it took a lot of time and discussion to convince the king, and the king was like, oh well, we'll stop fighting and you can still be my colonies and then I'll try to give you more freedom. And the Americans were like, no. And so the king was like, well, what about this? And the Americans were saying no. That what they wanted was basically they weren't going to sign a peace treaty unless King George and Parliament recognized them as a new nation, as a new country. Okay, and so the Americans wanted that acceptance from the British. They didn't want to be called British colonies anymore. They wanted to be American states. So finally, when it was signed, it was 1783. Remember this date because this date is on your test. You'll have to memorize the date of the Treaty of Paris, 1783. So the treaty recognized the United States as a new and independent nation, and it also gave America huge amounts of land. Remember, this land right here was won during the French and Indian War, but then King George said, oh, colonists, you can't have it. We're going to let the American Indians live on it. So that land was now officially given to the Americans, and America was recognized as a new country, the United States of America. So they got a lot more land. They got lands east of the Mississippi, south of Canada, so Canada's here, they got all that land, and then north of Florida. Remember, the Spanish still owned Florida. So in 1783, the United States almost doubled in size compared to what it was with the 13 colonies. Okay? So they got a large amount of land as well as being called a new country. So they're a little baby country at this point. So the Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolution. No more fighting after this. Okay. The 13 states were now free to make their own rules. So they didn't have to listen to the rules and laws of King George and Parliament. And then the land that was given to the Indian nations was now available for settlement. So, there's a whole nother perspective to this where you can imagine how the Native Americans felt. Like, this land was given to us, the king promised it to us, and now we lost it, and it wasn't even our war, our battle. So we don't hear a ton about the perspective of the Native Americans, but you can imagine how they'd be feeling at this point. Another really important thing right here is that all British troops would leave the American territories. So basically no more British troops in Boston, no more British troops in New York. They all were forced to leave. And then it says right here the trading laws were repealed. So remember when they were saying you could only trade with Great Britain, or you could only get your tea from Great Britain, or you can if you get tea or paint or lead from Great Britain, you have to pay tax, right? All of that was repealed, taken away, because now they're their own country, so they don't have to obey British laws anymore. And then right here it says the American colonists were free to trade with anyone of their choice. So this new country, all the other countries of the world are now recognizing, okay, there's a new country here. They're on this amazing land, very rich, fertile soil. They can grow things, trade things, and now the Americans can start trading with other countries and grow even more into a better and bigger country. All right, so that's kind of what the Treaty of Paris did. Remember the date, 1783. I don't know, it's kind of silly a way that I remember it. I'm like, the Treaty of Paris was 1783. I say that, and this is like, that's probably not supposed to be French. But so the Treaty of Paris is 1783. Try to remember it that way, okay? But that was what officially ended the war, because even after Yorktown, I mean, most people were like, hey, it's over, but the king had to decide that it was over and that he wasn't going to send any more troops. And so it took a lot of convincing by those representatives, but eventually they did, and the United States was made a country and officially recognized by one of the most powerful countries in the world. All right, so that was the end of that. Now tomorrow, or not tomorrow, sorry, on next week, we're going to be learning about women in the war and the role that they played in the war. We're also going to talk about Native Americans and African Americans and the role that they played in the war. And there's a few more characters that we have to learn about. So don't worry if you haven't heard your name yet. We need to learn about Phyllis Wheatley. We need to learn about Sybil Ludington, Abigail Adams, and then I think there's a few more people as well. So we'll be learning about those still. And then tomorrow, I wanted to let you know I'm going to be handing out your study guide. So your test is going to be Friday, May 1st. I'm sorry, not tomorrow. It's going to be Friday that I'm handing out your study guide, Friday. But your test is Friday, May 1st, and it's going to cover all of Chapter 13. Now, you'll notice a lot of what we learned in Chapter 13 was not in your book. I don't know if you guys have been looking in your book or not. So a real good study tool is not your book. A good study tool is using this PowerPoint and the yellow timeline that hopefully you guys have been filling out. It should be pretty much full by now if you've been consistent with filling that out. And then on the day of the test, I'm going to be asking you to take a picture of your yellow timeline and uploading it to an assignment, or perhaps the day after the test, so I can give you some time. I'll let you know when it's coming, but make sure that your yellow time is getting filled out, because I will be requiring you to turn that in very soon, within the next week and a half. Okay, guys? So we're not quite done with the American Revolution yet, but we do need to spend a little bit of time reviewing. And then I'm going to be giving you your study guide on Friday. All right, you guys, this lesson's a little bit shorter, so I would suggest that you spend some extra time studying those states and capitals. See you next time.